The United States could effectively be flying blind in 2020 when it comes to Russian efforts to interfere in our democracy. A CIA informant who provided intel to the U.S. from the highest levels of the Russian government was extracted for his own safety. The New York Times reports on the dramatic move. Quote, the move brought an end to the career of one of the CIA's most important sources. It also effectively blinded American intelligence officials to the view from inside Russia as they sought clues about Kremlin interference in the 2018 midterm elections and next year's presidential contest. It's a scary thought considering the broad consensus from inside and out of Trump's government about ongoing Russian attacks on our elections.
We acknowledge the threat. It is real. It is continuing. And we're doing everything we can to have a legitimate election that the American people can have trust in. However, they stepped up their game big time in 2016. We have not seen that kind of robust effort from them so far.
The Russians are absolutely intent on trying to interfere with our elections through,
Is it fair to say that
foreign influence in particular.
Everything we've done against Russia has not deterred them enough? All the sanctions, all the talk, they're still at it.
Well, my view is until they stop, they haven't been deterred enough.
And they're still doing it.
Yes.
In your investigation, did you think that this was a single attempt by the Russians to get involved in our election, or did you find evidence to suggest they'll try to do this again?
No, it wasn't a single attempt. They're doing it as we sit here. And they expect to do it during the next campaign.
And to understand just how essential this asset was, the Times adds this, quote, the Moscow informant was instrumental to the CIA's most explosive conclusion about Russia's interference campaign. That President Vladimir Putin ordered and orchestrated it himself. As the American government's best insight into the thinking and orders from Mr. Putin, the source was also key to the CIA's assessment that he affirmatively favored Donald J. Trump's election and personally ordered the hacking of the DNC. The only person who appears unconvinced at this point about the Russian threat is the president, who joked with Putin about future U.S. elections.
Mr. President, will you tell Russia not to matter to the 2020 election?
One of the reporters with the byline on that extraordinary story joins our conversation now from the New York Times, national security reporter Julian Barnes. Here with us at the table, Tim O'Brien, executive editor for Bloomberg Opinion. Julian, can you just take us through? I mean, it would appear that Vladimir Putin has also corroborated this asset's assessment by saying, when asked, I believe, by an American reporter who he favored, he said Donald Trump. So this was a valuable and credible CIA asset?
That's right. It has been very important to that central conclusion. Of course, the intelligence community has multiple sources. They don't have a high confidence assessment or conclusion without multiple sources. But it is hard to get at the thinking and strategies of Putin. And anybody who has, access to that is sometimes in meetings with Putin, sometimes sees Putin's work product, then that's very valuable to the CIA to get an early warning, if you would, on what Putin's up to.
Frank Figliuzzi, I want to read you a little bit more of Julian and his colleagues' reporting. The Times writes this: the informant's information was so delicate and the need to protect the source's identity so important that the CIA director at the time, John Brennan, kept information from the operative out of President Obama's daily brief in 2016. Instead, Mr. Brennan sent separate intel reports, many based on the source's information, in special sealed envelopes to the Oval Office. I can't even extrapolate how someone like this would share information with this president, who basically makes a joke at a Russian interference and has his political ally, William Barr, still investigating the origins of the Russia investigation.
Yeah, it's not unusual for extremely sensitive high-level sources to be treated in this kind of eyes-only manner of personal courier handed only to the president, stamped president's eyes only. But you're right, when the president's eyes belong to Donald Trump, it's hard to imagine that this would be handled properly. And of course, the media has been reporting that that may have been one of the reasons why this particular asset had to be exfiltrated. You know, Nicole, you and I, many months ago when the story was developing and a couple of dozen Russians were indicted, we were talking about the tip of the iceberg, and we talked about how there had to be sensitive, highly classified sources below the surface that were pointing the U.S. intelligence community to Putin's direct involvement in this. And sure enough, it appears at least we may be onto one of those human sources. As an intelligence professional, I'm deeply troubled that this person the existence of this person has been exposed. But I'm also careful to tell people who are concerned about that rest assured, the Russian intelligence service knew exactly what had happened when this guy and his family disappeared. They knew where he was inside the United States. This is not a shock to them. They've known this for a while. What's surprising is here we are having a conversation about the possibility that a source like this was exfiltrated because of a lack of trust in the president's capabilities.
Julian, I pointed at you because I want to follow up on one of Frank's points, and I want to follow up with a question of my own. It would appear that the biggest headline here is you take even the president's own appointees who are embattled at best, saying under oath when they go up to Capitol Hill that yes, Russia is still intent on attacking our elections. Yes, we still remain at risk of Russian meddling, and we're not the only country they attack, and they're probably not the only country that wants to attack us. But it would seem that we have less insight, we have less visibility into the highest levels of that Russian effort. Is that sort of one of the conclusions you reached through reporting the story?
That's right. And we've been working on this story for some months, and that is what officials have told us, that they simply have less good insight today than they had in 2016. Human sources take years to develop, and they're critical to helping flesh out the pictures that you might get from signals intelligence or intercepts or other kinds of things. Sources are hard to come by, and when you lose one, when you lose a couple of them, it becomes very difficult to fill that gap. And we know what Russia did last time. We know the kinds of techniques they did in 2016. But maybe they'll have a different playbook in 2020, and that's where the danger is.
And Tim O'Brien, one of the things we also know is that Donald Trump remains dedicated to taking help wherever he can get it. Here he is with George Stephanopoulos.
Your campaign this time around, if foreigners, if Russia, if China, if someone else offers you information on an opponent, should they accept it or should they call the FBI?
I think maybe you do both. I think you might want to listen. There's nothing wrong with listening. If somebody called from a country, Norway, we have information on your opponent. Oh, I think I'd want to hear it.
You want that kind of interference in our elections?
It's not an interference. They have information. I think I'd take it. If I thought there was something wrong, I'd go maybe to the FBI. If I thought there was something wrong. You go and talk honestly to congressmen. They all do it. They always have. And that's the way it is. It's called Oppo research.
No, it's not. And it's illegal. And like 30,000 things wrong with that. But in light of what Julian and his colleagues are reporting, you've got a president with his hand out for Oppo, which is foreign interference, and you've got less visibility inside the Kremlin's interference effort.
This is a reminder that once again, right now, the biggest national security threat facing the United States is Donald Trump. And it's Donald Trump because he's ignorant and he's undisciplined. When he sits in an interview and describes information coming from Russia to people campaigning in the United States as Oppo research, it is just such a categorical failure about what the information entails and what his responsibility is as the commander-in-chief and the president of the United States to use that kind of information responsibly. And I think one of the things in this recent story in Julian's reporting is the extent to which spycraft, and especially spycraft that's based on human intel, really relies on trust and long-term relationships. And Donald Trump disparaged the intelligence community while he was campaigning. He had one of his most bizarre first acts after he was elected was to go and visit CIA headquarters and essentially disrespect the group of people sitting right in front of him. And that population of people who develop relationships over time and are informed and also operate on trust, that gets blown up when you have someone at the top of the food chain who can't be trusted. Right. And one of the things in the Times story, it talked about how not only Smolenkov, but other sources around the world had become increasingly worried that they could be outed because there was such a breakdown in our intelligence apparatus.
And look, you don't even have to tie the conduct to the pulling out of this spy from Moscow. Donald Trump in the Oval Office with Kislyak and Lavrov put his arm around them, took a picture that I think we first saw in the Russian media or exclusively saw in the Russian media, and said, "I'm so glad I got rid of this nut job Jim Comey. It takes the pressure off me." I mean, we know so much of what we know about Donald Trump's enthusiasm for Russian interference from Donald Trump.
It's exactly right. And the President of the United States in that clip you just showed admitted he doesn't know right from wrong. You know, these foreign powers aren't coming to give him information because they're great people who want to, do a good thing. They're coming because they want something. They want to affect the process, and they want him to owe them on the back end. And bipartisanly, any normal, sane administration would walk away and call the FBI. In the closest election of our lifetime, Gore v. Bush, someone sent the Gore campaign a bunch of Bush debate tapes. They immediately picked up the package and took it to the FBI. You don't accept these kind of things. It is ridiculous. As you know, I do a bunch of international campaigns now. Foreign actors are in all of these elections. And after what Russia got for what they did in 2016, why wouldn't they? I mean, they're playing everywhere, and the world's police cop, the United States, is out there saying it's okay. The President of the United States and George Stephanopoulos just said, great, give me more. Like, there is now no discernible position from the United States government on any of this stuff.
Frank Figliuzzi, I want to give you the last word. I'm going to put you on the spot. You were here the day that Andy McCabe said that he opened a full field investigation into Donald Trump around these questions because the conduct was so in line with Vladimir Putin's national security objectives. Has anything changed? I mean, post-Mueller, Donald Trump went to the G8 and advocated for Putin to be invited to be welcomed back into the G8. I mean, isn't his conduct exactly in line with the kind of conduct that raised suspicions in the first place?
Well, not only has nothing changed, you could assert that it's actually gotten worse, that the evidence continues to pile up, that there is a bizarre motivation of unknown reasons for Trump to align himself with Russia and with Putin, which is why I have said that if impeachment proceedings continue and proceed, go forward, we need to include the counterintelligence findings of the FBI's investigation. I don't think that investigation is over, and I think the findings in that would contribute to the potential for impeachment.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.